Good morning and welcome to today's webinar presented to you in tandem by the Ontario General Contractors Association Innovation Committee and Aon to discuss the rise of the aware and predictive job site. This is the second webinar in a series of many that will detail how innovation in construction is shaping and changing our industry and how GCs like you can adapt to these technologies. I'm Jim Blair, Director of Business Development and Partner at Collaborative Structures Limited, but coming to you today in the capacity of Committee Chair of the OGCA's Innovation Committee. We have an incredible amount of insight to share with you this morning, detailing how the emerging and groundbreaking partnership between general contractors and the insurance industry are bringing job sites to life by the way of IoT Backbone that consolidates all the best risk-reducing and productivity-improving platforms under one roof. Most of all, we're going to detail to you how we can collectively be better, safer, and more efficient general contractors with the help of what pioneers like our panelists are going to share with us today. This morning, we're joined by the leaders of the IoT revolution on our panel. First, Mr. Cody Knoll is the manager of the construction services at PCL, based out of the Winnipeg office, and has an extensive experience in both infrastructure and buildings, working on Winnipeg's most prominent projects, including the Disraeli Bridges, Canada Museum for Human Rights, Southwest Rapid Transit, and True North Square. In his current role, Cody oversees the Construction Services Department, comprising of virtual design and construction, VDC, quality, schedule, document control, construction engineering, and construction technology. Welcome, Cody. Our second panelist today is Mr. Brian Kmet. Brian is the Director of Latium Technologies, responsible for Job Site Insights, JSI, product management, software development, and sales. JSI is a software as a service platform to bring IoT and advanced analytics to the job site, reducing risk and insurance damage claims, improving productivity, accelerating schedule, reducing costly rework, and driving operational excellence. Welcome, Brian. And rounding out the panel today and starting off the presentation is Mr. David Bocat of Aon in the capacity of Global Director of Growth, Innovation, and Insight on Aon's Global Construction and Innovation Group. To drive growth, David has been given jurisdiction over generating solutions for clients and partners using the market-leading volume of business that Aon transacts within the construction, infrastructure, and asset management sectors. David's primary focus is to utilize his position to develop industry-leading tools and methodologies to allow clients and partners to achieve optimal risk profiles for their companies, projects and assets. Dave is also going to share with us today how the insurance industry might even pay for it all. Right, Dave? I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Jim. And really glad to be here today to talk to you about the partnership that we put in place with Latium Job Site Insights. I guess, Jim, if we could put the slides up, that'd be great. Excellent. So yeah, we're talking about the rise of the aware and predictive job site. I mean, aware is one level where you're actually, understanding what's going on the project in an advanced framework, and then we'll get a bit into the predictive job site where the actual job site starts telling you what might go wrong in the future. So I just wanted to give a bit of a background, and maybe with the next slide. From our perspective, we started seeing in 7 or 8 years ago a significant amount of investment coming into the construction technology marketplace. I mean, everybody hears about the McKinsey slides and all the consultant slides around the construction industry's productivity and the lack of digitization and all that stuff. But we started seeing, significant investment coming in to the technology space and focusing in areas like the Internet of Things, blockchain, cloud, big data, artificial intelligence. Of course, we've all seen the growth of the project management software systems like the Procores and the Autodesks and the Trimbles and what have you. But you can see this slide just kind of goes into the amount of investment that has been taking place in the sector, and it continues to grow. And by the same token, there's just as much investment in the property technology or the prop tech space. So if this is construct tech, on the prop tech side, there's a significant amount of investment to make sure the built asset, once built, is operating efficiently and with less risk. So significant growth. We all acknowledge that. We all know that this is a big wave that's hitting the industry. And then we started noticing, 5 years ago that, hey, this isn't happening as fast as everybody thought. So if you go to the next slide, we started recognizing some of the hurdles. I mean, the low digitization within the construction industry, obviously is creating this, lack of incentive within the ranks to kind of adopt technology. It's always been done this way type of mentality. And I think that that's obviously when you're kind of at the bottom from a digitization standpoint, it does make it difficult to adopt. So that was one of the factors. And I think the reality is a lot of owners weren't as educated around technology. And though the contractors were starting to understand the technology's impact on productivity and risk, they were being looked to by the owners and other stakeholders to fund the technology by themselves. And obviously in construction, it's not one of the big, we're talking about the tech sector, they have big margins. Well, the construction industry isn't as lucky to have those big margins. So that's another hurdle that was in the industry. And lastly, I think, all of you recognize there are so many branded logos out there for different technologies. Some of them do the same thing, some of them do different things. And just the sheer complexity, having thousands of these companies approach you with a solution they think is going to solve your biggest problems is daunting. And so I think when we talk to our clients, they all said the same thing. They said, geez, it would be great if we could just have people focus on, what are the technologies that are really going to improve productivity and really going to reduce risk. So if you go to the next slide, what we decided to do at Aon about 5-6 years ago, myself and my colleague, Chris Green, we thought we'd set up a technology assessment panel, right? And really what we wanted to do is just take the data that we have around claims. As you guys know, there's property casualty, surety, sub-default insurance, professional liability, environmental. We got all these policies that we put in place on the project, and we harness that data to really identify what the biggest problems are in the marketplace, and then see if we can find technologies that can actually mitigate those problems, or in some cases prevent them. So we set this panel up. It's some of our best risk engineers, some of our best brokers, some of our best actuaries, and we brought them together to kind of do a dragon's den or a shark's tank on these companies. And we've done, I think we're approaching 200 now, so the slide's a bit out of date, but and we've got a lot of technology companies that are out the door. And we learned a lot, and I think one of the key factors is that we started seeing some trends. It started adding clarity, and I think it was less about the brand of the company, and the logo of the company. It was more about the category of the technology and trying to figure out how do we categorize these technologies. So if you go to the next slide, what we noticed is there's really three big technologies that were creating some type of opportunity to improve productivity and reduce risk. This is kind of a funny picture or depiction of the three technologies. It's kind of relating it to the human body. So we saw IoT as being a big, the Internet of Things as being a big factor, kind of like the nerves on the job site. You need the connective tissue, which is the cloud, which on job sites is a lot of long range, wide area network technologies, which by the way, Latium Job Site Insights utilizes. And then we noticed that the data that was coming off of these IoT devices, as well as other data, not only IoT devices, was being fed into algorithms that could help people understand what was going wrong, but even started to get predictive around certain aspects of risk and productivity. Ultimately, we see these three technologies coming together in a way that creates full transparency, real-time awareness, and we're seeing the beginnings of the predictive analytics. So we're seeing better decisions and improved productivity and lower risk. So just real quick, here are some of the, if you go to the next slide, here are some of the technologies that we really, the categories. Remember what I said about brand versus category. Think about the technologies in the way, you think about categories of solutions to mitigate risk or improve productivity. And these are some of the big winners we're seeing in the IoT categories to date. Obviously, water mitigation, it's actually being widely used. We're seeing like up to 90 to 95% mitigation of risk with some of the water technologies coming to the marketplace. It's a big winning category. Environmental monitoring is having many impacts. This is temperature, humidity, particulate, various other aspects. being monitored. And obviously, as we know, when you're constructing something, temperature and humidity and other factors do come into play on quality of workmanship. Worker injury, we're seeing, mitigation deltas of about 30 to 40% around some of these worker injury technologies, the wearables and the computer vision. But there's a whole depth of solution coming in that sector. There's weather, there's fire, there's concrete integrity, which is great from a productivity standpoint. Brian's going to touch on that. Structural integrity is one that's definitely rising up the charts. Supply chain, both counterparty risk data, as well as IoT devices being used to track the supply chain. Once again, Brian will touch on that a bit. And site quality progress tracking and detecting defects through 3D as-built image capture, right? So these are just some of the categories emerging, and there are other IoT categories that are coming. We have a saying that's, for every risk, there's an IoT device, and for every category of risk, that isn't being taken care of, there will be an IoT device. So anyways, we move to the next slide. So ultimately, we noticed that these devices were all being used separately by a lot of our clients, and we started recognizing there was an opportunity for somebody to come along and actually bring it all together. And so we were always on the lookout for something that would, we were kind of calling it like an IoT backbone, a data repository, something that could be foundational to creating the productivity and risk data from the job site. And on that basis, we saw this IoT backbone emerge and through Latium Job Site Insights. And obviously, we're really excited to the potential of this offering. And it brings it all together under a single pane of glass, but it also brings it all together in one data set. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brian, and he can walk you through a bit of a walkthrough of Latium Job Site Insights, and then we can get into some questions.
Thanks, David. If we could advance to the next slide, please. So today I'm going to describe to you what David has been referring to as the IoT backbone, and which we call Job Site Insights, powered by Yonder. And I'll just ask you to advance the slides as I progress through my presentation. We recognized early on when we were designing JSI and architecting its components that we're really addressing a risky business. And our partnership with Aon and our work with Aon addresses that. And I have a slight animation here that really portrays three of the fundamental components of the platform. We began by using temperature and humidity sensors to measure those conditions as it concerns rework. And we recognize that rework is a costly endeavor in the space. The second component we recognized, and my slides are moving quickly here, so I will allow them to play through. We had three fundamental focuses. So rework with using temperature and humidity sensors. Secondly, the use of in situ concrete sensors to measure concrete strength and maturity. And in comparison to traditional concrete testing methods for maturity, we're able to significantly advance schedule as compared to third-party testing. And then lastly, on the risk front, water system failures during constructions are the leading cause of, or the biggest cause of BR claims, builders risk claims. And as David will attest to, there's a plethora of research on that topic. So our inclusion of water sensing and valve shutoff technology within the platform allows you to limit your water damages on large scale projects or small scale projects to the extent illustrated here, where there's simply a bit of water on the floor, because we're able to shut that water valve off in an automated fashion in response to the sensors picking up the water on the floor or wherever it resides. So unfortunately, that video didn't play as smoothly as I liked, but the focus of JSI, of course, is risk mitigation. And the other benefits of the platform are productivity improvements, safety improvements, schedule improvements, and build quality improvements. So these all have a foundation in risk, and the ancillary benefits propagate. And I'll talk about that later on as we describe some of the use cases and successes that JSI has brought to the site, to the job site. Next slide, please. So really, how does all this work? And what we do is we install wireless LoRa, that stands for long range, and I'll describe that shortly, sensors across the job site. I'll also describe the type of sensors we have, And as you saw earlier, we have water sensors, we have temperature and humidity sensors, and others that will be described shortly. But those sensors that are ruggedized for construction, they use a battery life, which we look for an average of 5 years on that battery life. They wirelessly transmit data to the JSI cloud, and the JSI cloud analyzes that data in real time and looks for events or conditions or anomalies that, if you don't correct them, they become costly problems. They identify risks that if you don't mitigate or address, you are going to suffer impairment of productivity or schedule or have safety issues. And then, of course, we alert job site personnel to that in real time. As those events are detected from the sensors, relayed to the cloud, that process happens in real time, and site personnel receive notifications on their phone or in the application's interface, which we'll see. I think I've got a slide illustrating that shortly, but allowing for that quick response to events on job sites that are risks or are conditions that will impair, again, productivity, safety, schedule, and build quality. So next slide, please. So here's a visualization of the application. It comes in 2 factors, a JSI portal or a web interface that is typically arrayed in a job site trailer on a large monitor. And what I'm illustrating in the graphic on the left-hand side is the use of a physical map. We incorporate Autodesk drawings, for example. We have interfaces to that technology. And we array the sensors on the map, and the sensors illustrate in real time the conditions on the job site. And you can see here, there's a wide array of sensors that I'll describe again very shortly, but we physically portray that in real time. And again, because that's on the job site trailer, we can see conditions on the job site at all times. The mobile device arguably is probably the most used component on a job site, and it serves really 2 purposes. Number one, as you see by the alert illustrated there, we send notifications of job site conditions directly to the phone, the mobile device. Secondly, you'll notice the icons or the dots on the map represent the location of the sensor. When installing the sensor on the job site, we scan a QR code affixed to the sensor that uses the phone's geolocation capabilities to locate the sensor on the map. So we've taken a lot of the headache out of the installation process. And in response to job site feedback, the simpler we make it, the easier it is to use. Job site adoption increases dramatically. So our focus, of course, was simplicity, ease of use, and providing interfaces that provide job site personnel the information they need to be aware of all of the risks that David described, as well as other conditions that can impact productivity and performance of the job site, and what we refer to as driving operational excellence. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just briefly describe some of the features, and not all of the features, that we think are particularly pertinent to risk mitigation. First off, we've integrated smoke, fire detection, and emergency evacuation systems into the platform. And as you'll see shortly, JSI doesn't do it all. The backbone and the architecture of JSI readily incorporates other software products, other technologies, many of which David described in the matrix of categories of software and technology. We can incorporate many of those into the platform due to its design and its architecture. Workforce safety, of course, is paramount to a general contractor. So we have sensory technology that enables that by indicating worker location, the number of workers, the trade types that might be on a job site, the zones they've accessed, and the work areas they've accessed. And then lastly, as illustrated by job site access, the graphic on the right-hand side of this slide, we have a gating system or a complementary software solution known as job site access that admits personnel to the job site through a card swipe or as well as facial recognition. That platform also enables health screening, for example, COVID, of course, as everyone's well aware, is an issue. And we can do temperature scanning and then divert workers entering the job site for secondary screening or other consideration as deemed appropriate by a general contractor. What's really important about this is that, as David mentioned, these applications are generating a plethora of data and many forms and factors And one of the things that I appreciate about job site access is that because of the platform provides a great depth of integration with other applications, when that worker walks through that gate turnstile, we immediately know their safety record, their performance record, any other issues that may affect worksite safety. Perhaps they have not taken or are not up to date on fall protection training. We can provide an alert through Job Site Insights that notifies site supervision that, hey, you know what? This worker's fall protection or certifications are lacking. And I think that's really at the forefront, and getting in front of workers' safety is ensuring they're entering the job site with all of their credentials and training in place. So the integration capabilities that I'll also talk about shortly are essential part of the platform when it comes to data management and the integration of the data that these applications all generate. Next slide, please. So a few of the features. Structural and geomonitoring is a sensory capability within the platform. This is not only detecting the motion, but the use of vibration analysis to predict motion or structural failure. So a lot of these sensory technologies are not just the observation of a variable, it's also the use of that information in a predictive or a prescriptive sense. And again, a key component of the platform is the integration of these technologies, as David said, on that single pane of glass. So in the next slide, I have further examples of other monitoring capabilities that are integrated into the platform. Asset tracking and asset utilization are key on job sites. Large job sites can waste a great deal of time searching for items, searching for materials, searching for equipment. So where are things in real time with GPS asset tracking sensors? And then, of course, we have sensory technology for equipment and machinery. Two examples, we can monitor engine performance. And again, now you're getting into the domains of predictive asset maintenance. If I'm listening to the variables in an engine or a piece of machinery, algorithms are available that allow you to predict, hey, you know what? You better do an oil change, or you better perform a certain procedure on that machinery, because if you don't, the machinery will fail, and now you're dealing with operational continuity issues. And then lastly, we can also measure fuel levels. And more importantly, on job sites, we can measure electrical energy consumption. So are you using equipment unnecessarily? Is that scissor lift sitting there consuming energy, or other assets using energy that you don't need to use? And utilization is important. A lot of general contractors are renting equipment that remains on site, depending on how their contracts are structured with the rental agencies. You only want to pay for uptime of machinery or use of machinery as opposed to idle time. And now you have objective evidence coming off the sensors to support the fact that a machinery or a piece of equipment was only used for a given period of time. On the next slide, this is really the heart and soul of the platform, and where my team focuses a lot of effort is on analytics. So JSI telemetry in and of itself is time series data. It's a variable measured at a point in time, typically. Well, in and of itself, time series data can be useful, but what the platform allows, because we build it on application programming interfaces, or what are known as APIs, we can now ingest and assimilate data in the JSI data repository from a variety of different sources. So for example, as I mentioned earlier, if I have information from my health and safety systems about a worker's track record when it comes to those variables, and they're ingressing the job site through the gating system, I can now provide that alert that something may be amiss with that worker because I now have access to all of this data. More importantly, I'm setting the stage for what David referred to, the predictive job site. So I have this wealth and this treasure of data. So I can do descriptive analytics, that is, what has happened. I can do predictive analytics, what is likely to happen. Given a number of predictive outcomes, I can prescribe prescriptive analytically what I should do, what's the best course of action. And then lastly, what I refer to as cognitive analytics. The JSI platform, a particular product within that ecosystem, is known as Job Site Vision. We are using machine learning algorithms to identify quality and safety anomalies. And just like a sensor alerts me to an adverse temperature that I might be concerned about on a job site that impacts millwork, for example, I now have the ability to identify things visually and do so with machine learning algorithms and computer vision that alert me to further anomalies and risks. Perhaps an excavation is not properly barricaded. Well, I have all of this video that's observing excavations, for example, through three-dimensional cameras, through job site drones. We leverage that in the platform, and we apply all of the analytical capabilities that are available in the technology to provide true data-driven insights through the use of AI and machine learning in particular. The next slide, please. I want to talk very quickly about the technology. So David mentioned LoRa, that stands for long range. And what that means is a sensor can communicate with a gateway, that is what we call the smart edge device, which transmits data to the JSI cloud. That distance can be up to 16 kilometers. Now that is actually not realized on a job site, and it's the reason we place this on the LoRa protocol, is that it has the ability to penetrate steel, subterranean parkades, machinery, equipment, all of the obstacles that impair radio transmission. LoRa has proven to be the best protocol for a job site. This thing is scalable. It's readily scalable from small. It's been deployed on small retrofit projects of 10,000 square feet to 55-story high-rise construction or vertical construction. It's been arrayed across buildings, civil and industrial markets. And then lastly, the smart edge device is a proprietary gateway. Again, a gateway being a device that transmits sensory data to the JSI cloud. We designed a single smart edge device that can communicate with any LoRa sensor. So we go to the marketplace and examine the sensors, as David indicated, that address particular domains or concerns from a risk perspective. And if it's LoRa, we can immediately integrate it into the platform. The value of that is we reduce cost, we reduce complexity, and as I said earlier, we really simplify installation on the job site. Typically, a sensor vendor will provide its own gateway. We did not want to play that game due to the complexity factor and the cost factor. So we have one smart edge device arrayed on a job site. There can be multiple smart edge devices depending on the nature of the project, the size of the project, but we believe we've greatly simplified the IoT landscape via our smart edge device. Next slide, please. So again, I mentioned earlier that we built the platform with APIs, application programming interfaces. That's a nice computer term that uses industry protocols to stitch and connect applications. And here I've arrayed some of the applications that David referred to that we bring into the platform and present on a single pane of glass. So what does this allow us to do? Well, now we're bringing all of the data sources together. We're doing it in one spot. We're providing that data in a repository, and that's enabling the analytics that I described in the previous slide. So now we have a platform that enables a great deal of analytics, both descriptively, predictively, cognitively, and otherwise. And we've recognized, of course, that the platform doesn't do everything. We have to recognize that there are leading construction applications that we want to participate with. Some of them that I'll call out here. We've recently completed a project in Toronto with Boston Dynamics robotic dog known as Spot. The dog was carrying the payload, the sensory payload, and LiDAR scanners for measuring the flatness or levelness of concrete. And we were transmitting that data via the dog as the platform carrier into the JSI platform. Other examples of technology, Ramtech is the fire suppression system and alerting system I described earlier. That has been fully integrated into the platform. And really, we look for best of breed. A lot of common applications, Procore, Autodesk are all incorporated or will be incorporated into the platform. And we do so to complement the platform and introduce technology partners. So we believe in an open ecosystem, the integration and sharing of data, and presenting that data in near real time to the people that matter most, those operating the job site and working on the job site, folks like Cody, who will speak about that in the Q&A. I'm exhausting some air, so I'm hoping I'm near the end of my slide deck here. There we go. So lastly, and this should be my final slide, we have an array of sensors represented by the circles here. And really, this is an eye chart, and I'm not going to list every single sensor that's incorporated into the platform. We can certainly make the deck available. The point I'm making here is that we've arrayed our sensory portfolio along 4 dimensions: health and safety, risk, quality, and productivity, if you will. As David indicated, these sensors can be arrayed across any dimension. You could address particular insurance risks on the job site, as David had in his chart, water protection, fire protection. This is really a way to describe the fact that we can incorporate any sensor, any LoRa sensor, into the platform. You will also see here, and not part of this presentation, the complementary software. Job site vision I spoke of, job site access you've seen. Job site robotics is our integration with Spot the Dog. And of course, integration with third parties is tremendously important in the platform and brings an ecosystem of products to bear in a presentation standpoint from a single pane of glass, as we refer to it. The next slide, please. There's our website. If you require further information, I'd be happy to discuss this or any other technologies in the platform, as would David. And I believe that leads us to the Q&A.
No, I think we just have a quick concluding slide that I'll
there we
go
go.
through.
My
I
apologies.
wanted to just highlight really quickly the benefits of why we entered into the partnership. As I mentioned before, looking for somebody to bring all these tools together, because it was just too much. I literally walked into a contractor's office in the US and they had 15 screens up representing 15 different devices. And it was just, you can see how it was so obvious that something needed to come to the market. And it was great that Latium brought this to the market. Our partnership is about really, a few things. We want to make it simple. And I think Latium Job Site Insights has done that. It's all about the category as opposed to the brand. The brands can be integrated into the backbone, which is great, but it's simple. And, we can walk you through the categories that are doing the best. It's cost effective. So we do have a contribution model with this partnership where the technology provides, an incentive to move this forward, a discount. The insurers are now starting to provide improved terms because they see pretty significant benefit around reducing the risks that they pay out claims on. So it's a pretty simple equation for them. When they see the risk is being reduced materially, then they obviously are incented to put that stuff on the job. So why not, help the contractor and the owner and the designer put that on the job. And if you look at that triangle, really there's 3 value propositions to the built environment. One is reducing risk throughout the life of the asset, not only construction phase, operations phase. Remember, a big part of this is the backbone stays in place going into the operation. So there's a huge benefit to the owner. And we obviously at Aon are very interested in the reduction of risk. Improve productivity during construction, obviously primarily a contractor and subcontractor benefit, and then improve productivity during operations. And there are other benefits, and I won't go through each because I want to get to the questions. But like Brian said, we'll share the deck with you guys, and happy to have more discussions on that. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim, and we can dive into the questions.
Thanks, guys. That was really informative. David, maybe talk just a little bit more about what is the benefit of this aware and predictive job site to the insurance sector specifically?
Yeah, Jim. Obviously, I think and coincidentally, I did bring a slide for that. It's like I read your mind. So I guess if we could just pull up the next slide on the webinar, I think if you think about it, this is a typical claim, a claims curve, right? And so when the claim happens, eventually, it starts like water starts leaking, and then it starts leaking down to the 5th floor, and it grows in size, and then eventually it becomes like discovered, usually by humans in the traditional job site. And ultimately, the insurer obviously has to fork out that amount of money if it's an insured risk. So they're like, okay, well, we know what we're paying out, right? And this is how insurance is done. You look at historical data. With this backbone, and I think you can see, it's all about awareness. It's about being aware of something happening much earlier, seeing the train coming 1,000 feet away as opposed to 5 feet away. And so really it's discovering it at a much lower level. So the IoT discovery levels are pretty significantly lower. Like, I mean, think about it. You've got these devices all over the job site 24/7, as opposed to having somebody inspecting safety on the job site every week or every day if you're lucky. And really, the key for us is the insurers are very interested in figuring out what is the mitigation delta of IoT. For some devices, it's like 90 to 95%. Some of them we're seeing come in at 30 to 40%. Some of them are lower and maybe we don't use those ones, but we're on the lookout for devices, and this is really where the insurers are going. And of course, that bottom line there, I don't know if you can see that, but the potential, there's an arrow pointing to the loss event. The potential of predictive analytics is actually preventing the risk from even happening. So basically, the job site starts telling you, you've got a very high likelihood of somebody being injured due to not wearing their safety goggles, and maybe you should have a toolbox talks with everybody on the job site to prevent that risk, just based on the data that is coming in. So this predictive job site is being used on individual technologies, but it's also, imagine what it's going to be like when you have all these devices under one roof, and the ability to look at all the devices and see, are there little precursor pieces of data that can predict a big event happening? And obviously that's something that really excites us, and it excites the insurance industry as well.
So what does that IoT backbone then mean for the insurance industry?
Well, I think if I go to the next slide, like I said, I'm reading your mind, Jim. And I think, ultimately we're seeing, the traditional insurance underwriting methodology, which is really largely looking at data of the past, migrating into one where they start recognizing data of the future, data of the present as it's happening, the aware job site, and then the predictive analytics, which is data of the future. And I mean, we've seen it adopted in personal lines insurance, with telematics being used on cars, where you can put the thing that measures your braking and your acceleration and your speeds, right? A little big brotherish, I know that, but ultimately, I think with the data coming in, we're really seeing the birth of edge underwriting, which is, underwriting with more immediate relevant data and even predicting risks that could manifest. So the insurance industry is really excited, and they want to start measuring this mitigation delta. So we're helping to facilitate that. And we think that this partnership is going to be a key piece of that process. So we're excited, and the insurer is excited to kind of get the ball rolling. And more data that we get, the more we can prove those mitigation deltas and ultimately end up in a good spot. So yep, that's it.
Brian, can you talk a little bit about how JSI has helped improve productivity?
Yeah, magically, I guess you're reading my mind as well, or I'm reading yours. We've got a couple of slides on that I alluded to earlier. I want to describe two particular use cases or case studies, if you will. The first here in Edmonton, the ICE district. The tower on the right is the Stantec Engineering Tower, and the tower on the left is the JW Marriott at 55 stories, the Stantec at 66 stories. It was really the first production deployment of JSI on a large vertical construction job. The Stantec tower, the tower on the right, we deployed temperature and humidity sensors. You'll recall my animation where we described the use of temperature and humidity sensors to monitor environmental conditions pertaining to millwork. And in this particular case, the project had budgeted $175K for millwork damage and rework. The use of sensors and the careful monitoring of temperature and humidity avoided all of that in the estimate. There was no millwork damage, nor was there any rework. Supplementary to that, because we were carefully monitoring temperatures, we had better control of heating costs or temporary heating, not running heating unnecessarily. Cold weather construction, 3-year project or 2-year project, and a $250,000 savings in temporary heating costs were realized. The tower on the left, the JW Marriott, was the first deployment of in situ automated concrete maturity monitoring. And an engineering study was performed by the GC on this topic, and 1,100 hours of schedule savings were realized by automating that and comparing that to traditional testing methods. The other ancillary benefits, better safety. There's a better risk profile there. Fewer people on site, fewer potential collisions between people and equipment and what have you, and also better testing quality was realized. The next very quick use case I wanted to describe was in the Toronto market. And this, if we advance the slides a couple here, go to the next slide, please. This was the use of water detection technology or water detection sensors and automated valve shutoff. So during construction, a water failure occurred in the building's pump room, and the valve was shut off automatically to the domestic water supply, and the extent of the water damage is the water you see on the floor there. It was estimated that had that not protected and water had flowed undetected, that there was a liability of $300,000 in replacing the pump room equipment and the damages that occurred to it. More relevantly, and equally important, is we see the leak that resulted from a plugged toilet in the unoccupied suite during turnover and ultimately occupancy. And by, again, shutting off that water supply, you seriously mitigate the amount of damage if you're able to detect that water quickly and avoid the rework, the costs, and of course, the impact on build quality, and ultimately the reputation of the general contractor suffers when these damages occur. So that's very quickly two very succinct examples of the savings and the value of having sensory technology to protect things during construction, as well as the technology is frequently left behind for turnover and in occupancy.
Yeah, and Jim, we've got lots of forming now around the mitigation delta, like, you know, in specific pilots that have been done by clients and insurers, you know, where we can see the actual amount of money that's been saved on losses. It's a tricky game, you know, when you actually have technology that actually is mitigating risk. You're trying to figure out, okay, how big was the risk going to be if you didn't have the technology? So you have to really have a science behind calculating the savings, and so we're working on developing that both for risk reduction and productivity.
So this data that you're tracking, are you keeping that in your individual customer silos to evaluate their premiums?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the data is held in a way that's you know, not breaching any confidentiality issues, and ultimately, it's creating value for the industry as a whole, and just sharing the story about risk reduction. You know, and ultimately, from that standpoint, I think you know, everybody wins in a situation where we're sitting around trying to figure out what risks are coming. We really do think this is going to be like a community that forms, where we'll be sitting around looking at different IoT devices and trying to, you know, figure out what the mitigation is and what the productivity pickup is. And I understand we're going to be doing something at the OGCA symposium in April, where we'll walk through some of the technologies and really try to get the beginnings of a community that I think could form, where we sit around trying to figure out, you know, how is this working, and was this working? You know, what is the mitigation delta data looking like for certain types of risk issues or productivity issues? So definitely looking forward to that.
Can you just piggyback on that and maybe talk about perhaps what some of the insurance incentives look like, or what they've been?
Yeah. I mean, you've got everything from full payment of a certain IoT device for projects. You've got you know, partial payment for devices, you know, categories. You got better deductibles. You know, we've seen increased capacity. You know, for instance, if you can only secure like $100 million in builder's risk capacity, or $50 million in builder's risk capacity for a certain project, you're more likely to increase that capacity based on risk mitigation and coverage improvements. I mean, the beginning of this started happening about a year or two ago in the commercial insurance space, and obviously we've seen you know, it mature in the personal lines with home and auto, but really it's the insurers recognizing that rather than paying out losses, maybe we should pay a little bit of the premium that we have, you know, to mitigate the very risks we insure. The client wins, they win, the project wins, the owner wins, everybody's happy. And I think that's really the game. If we can go further down this road, I think we've got a really great opportunity to build out this component of the digital twin. I mean, remember, this is all part of a larger ecosystem that's forming, which is the digital twin, which brings it all together. And I think I personally think it's one of the most exciting parts of the digital twin. But you know, ultimately, once that's up and running, you've got something that goes from the construction phase to the operations phase, It really helps identify issues at a much earlier level so you can make better decisions.
Thanks. Cody, being on the execution and implementation side of things, what are some of the challenges you're experiencing when getting technology implemented on your job site?
I'd say, for our field leaders and for our teams, the important thing to stress is the value case for a lot of these technologies. What they want to see is, what is this going to do for me and what's the value? They want to understand that what they're investing in is going to have, reasonable return on investment, and the time that they're going to spend is going to be worthwhile. So it's important to build up some of those early use cases, especially when, anybody that's tried to implement a new technology on a construction site will sympathize with the challenges that come with that. But it's important that we build those early use cases and really stress, what's the why behind what we're doing? How is this working for us? What's the value that we're building from it? And then those success stories build on themselves. So, call me a field guy. I'm not in the field every day and working day to day with our trades, with our subcontractors and mitigating the day-to-day risks. That's our superintendents, project managers that are out there managing those risks. And, it really needs to come from them and building on the use cases that they have and sharing those lessons learned and sharing those stories to make sure that we have that repository of information that we can go back and say, hey, we did this on this job site. How are we carrying that forward and building on that and progressing that day to day?
Do you have any real world example that you give us where some sort of device has mitigated a loss for you guys?
So recent example, like what Brian had mentioned earlier about, the implementations on small job sites to large job sites. I'd say nearly half of our implementations here with job site insights have been within our special projects division. And that's, jobs that are under $20 million. So, essential implementation doesn't need to be very large or very expensive to mitigate a big amount of risk. And I think that's what we've seen here is that small investments have netted some, big gains in terms of potential claims. So, example is we had a job site here where we had a temperature and humidity sensor within a mechanical room of a project. And, we're obviously dealing with cold temperatures here in Winnipeg. And we had a insulator who had removed some insulation from this mechanical room, left at the end of the day, didn't re-insulate the room, temperatures dropped. And, we were very close to having a freezing event on our main water line into the building. We got a notification, we were able to remedy that. We mitigated a, potentially six-figure claim potentially on a project like that. On another project where it wasn't necessarily a claim situation, but we installed on a job site where we had swing stages and we had this weather station up that would have our wind speed and direction and tell us, time of day instantaneously, what's our wind speed and direction. We could have alerts set up that if our wind speeds were exceeded, that we could proceed with work, or if we had to halt work. But, really our means of getting those wind speeds previously was, from the airport or from another weather station throughout the city. But having something localized allowed us to actually accelerate our schedule because we had lower wind speeds at the project site just because of the surrounding conditions of the project site. We were able to keep working on those swing stages and keep working safely, but also stop work, when it was unsafe and get those alerts immediately. So we weren't having to have somebody up there daily with an anemometer, checking the wind. We could get those alerts immediately. Two simple use cases.
With all these devices tracking so much data, what are the solutions for data storage that you or other contractors are using right now?
That's probably a better answer for Brian, I guess, but that's all housed within our ecosystem.
Yeah, the JSI platform, first and foremost, we use Microsoft Azure on the back end. This platform is hosted on Microsoft Azure, and we utilize the appropriate data technologies. So we have relational storage, we have binary or what's known as blob storage, for large blocks of data. And it's highly scalable. It's very elastic in how it responds to data demands. And we've automated the expansion and contraction of data in response to the data volumes being pushed through the platform. I noticed there was a question in the chat about what was the actual data volumes. I honestly don't know that number. I'd have to look that up, but it's measured in the gigabytes, and the data volumes are large, but the platform is able to handle high transactional data volumes and large quantities of time series data.
And is the contractor the owner of all of that data?
Absolutely. We've set the platform up so that when we onboard a new general contractor or a customer, it's a SaaS application. It's software as a service. So just like if you use Salesforce, you're licensed to use the software. Your data is secured. We can't see it. Other contractors can't see it. And I should mention that is a concern, right? It's a competitive business, and we do protect the data interests. We have been subjected to penetration testing and data intrusion testing by recognized firms that operate in that space from a cybersecurity perspective, data integrity perspective, and have received certifications that we meet common industry standards. The other side of the fence, of course, is it's Microsoft Azure. Nobody can provide, in my opinion, better security mechanisms technology-wise than Microsoft Azure. They're leaders in the space, and we take advantage of that. So data is fully protected and fully private, if you will.
For a general contractor interested in getting into this world of IoT Backbone and predictive technology, what's your recommendation on how a small to medium-sized general contractor would start to enter this world?
Well, I mean, I think, from the risk perspective, what we're doing is we're working with clients to go through where their losses are coming from, right? I mean, it's all well and good to kind of put technology on the job site, but if you're not putting it on the job site with an intent to solve problems within your company or within your projects, then it's just fancy technology for the sake of having fancy technology. So we think we want to use the loss data of the client to see, okay, here's where your problems are coming from on your projects. Likewise, we want to help them identify their productivity data to find out where their productivity might be lacking and focus the energy on those areas. And that's what's beautiful about having, the IoT Backbone is like a canvas. You can attach the pieces you want to attach based on where you might not be performing as well, right? So you want to kind of hone in on those areas of weakness or areas where you can improve. And so that's really, from our perspective, it's probably one of the great ways to start. And then over time, you can start measuring the impact of the technology specific to your company. Like, here's the losses you used to have related to water, and now look at the losses related to water, right? You're obviously treating that issue, and obviously with less water losses, your productivity is going to improve, et cetera, et cetera. So you start measuring that data.
Yeah, I think I would add to that. Many of our customers start with proof of concept activities. They have an idea, or more importantly, they have a problem they want to solve, and we believe we can help them, for example, in a particular sensory capacity. We begin with a proof of concept and run it on the job site over a defined period of time. It also leads to, in response to, I'm looking in the chat here, what level of awareness of JSI within the Canadian and global industry. It's growing. I mean, let's be honest, IoT on job sites is growing slowly, but surely. We have customers in Australia, across North America, and in Belgium. So awareness, and my observation has been a lot of word of mouth, and working with Aon, who has that exposure to a broad, they insure a lot of general contractors, and we have marketing efforts, of course, but the awareness is growing, and we're seeing IoT related technologies spring up in other applications, other construction related applications. So it's a growing competitive field, and awareness, in my opinion, is increasing.
And I'd say the awareness of JSI specifically is really something, Brian, that's happened in the last year. I mean, I believe, from my understanding, is it was being used obviously by PCL, and then other contractors you joint ventured with were saying, hey, can we get that? And I mean, when we saw it, like I said, there wasn't something out there that specifically focused on bringing all the devices together, and that's what something that's out there that really compares, and from our perspective, it makes tons of sense. And I just think it's a great, like I said, it's a great canvas for us to play with as a community to figure out what we can use to improve productivity and reduce risk.
I think maybe one of the biggest takeaways that I'm getting from this is something you guys mentioned up front, is that it's not necessarily as daunting and as scary as perhaps what it's perceived to be. And there's people out there like yourselves that general contractors can connect with to understand what is the best delivery for your specific situation, and perhaps work your way into it slowly with the types of technologies that that you implement on your projects.
And you can definitely go project to project, right? It's like, it's not like you have to do it across the company. You just, and I think that's what happens all the time, right? The field often will be saying, hey, we want to try this thing out, let's do it. And I think this just gives the ability for the head of the company to go, oh, what's working? You know, because the field can play with certain the backbone, then the company reaps the benefit of collecting all that information so that they can figure out what path to go down the road on.
And I think more than anything, probably the innovation committee is really seeing what the benefits are for what you guys are launching right now, and something we're continuing to dive further into with both Aon and the committee at large to push out to our members. So huge hats off to what you guys have done and where you guys are heading for the betterment of the industry on the whole. So with that, guys, we are at time at this point. So maybe I just want to pitch to everybody that if there is more interest from your firm specifically as to what IoT Backbone and some of these technologies and how they're benefiting general contractors at large, the symposium that's coming up, OGCA Symposium in Collingwood, Blue Mountain, April 7th to 9th, there are going to be some demonstrations specifically on some of these technologies. So registration for that can be accessed through the OGC website. And I strongly recommend that everybody gets signed up to take a look at some of the powerful things that these guys are up to. So with that, gentlemen, thank you so much for your participation. I think certainly for me, it's eye-opening on some of the possibilities that general contractors can implement. And we look forward to seeing you guys in Collingwood. So thank you so much.